Oh my goodness. Another day, another disaster. That is about where we're at right now with the Indianapolis Colts. And part of that, of course, is due to anger and frustration from the fan base. And the reality is that for the next, I don't know, your guess is as good as mine, for a while, let's call it the next month, right? We could project that far. Nothing we hear about the Indianapolis Colts is going to be good news. Of course, if Chris Ballard gets fired, for those of you who want him fired, then that will be good news for you. But ultimately, that's kind of good news. That's bad news. That would be good news for you, right? There's not anything great about the idea of firing your general manager. That's not a sign that your team is in a good spot, okay? But there's a few things we have to talk about today, but we'd be remiss without starting with the whistleblower that we have in the Colts locker room. Obviously, a bombshell report from The Athletic that a lot of people have seen by now. But on the off chance that I'm the first one bringing it to you, here's what was said by an anonymous player in the Colts locker room. There's no vision from the top down, from the front office to the coaches to the players. No one is ever on the same page. And every year at the end, we're sitting here losing. If you look at the best teams in the league, they all have a vision and they commit to it. The Chiefs keep winning because they have a vision. The Lions turn things around because they have a vision. There's no vision here. Okay, listen, that right there in of itself, what am I supposed to say about that that hasn't already been said? There's actually a piece in this article by The Athletic. And who wrote this? Was it James Boyd? Zach Kiefer and James Boyd, to cite the source, as I believe the journalistic thing would be to do. A little water right here. I'm out of water, so I better keep my voice for the rest of this one. Everyone talking about that no vision comment, and that's all good and well, but there was a part about this thing that stuck out to me a little bit more, and I'm trying to kind of filibuster you through as I find it within the article that I have pulled up in front of my face, because it was either the same anonymous player or a different anonymous player saying something else. Okay, so here you go, right here. This is the part, maybe people are talking about this. I have not seen anything when I'm looking at the posts and all of that stuff. How about this? Player says they were trying to hold Richardson accountable, which is understandable, but then the guy they put in wasn't the guy either. So they went back to AR, and at that point, it's like, okay, but what are we doing? That really affected the team. Now, that is, in my opinion, far more insightful about the Indianapolis Colts than the no vision bit, right? That just kind of confirms all of the rage that we're seeing right now. But something like that gives us a little bit of insight. Of course, that's referring to the benching of Anthony Richardson, if you were unable to figure that out by what I read to you. How about that? What do you think about that? Now, here, let me say this. Number one, I'm glad that guy came out and said, because that was the reasonable stance at the time. And I'd imagine if this gentleman said that, a lot of the locker room felt the same way, that it wasn't benching Richardson that lost that locker room. Contrary to what you guys think, and contrary to a lot of the commentary, that was the definition of accountability. When Anthony Richardson is playing like that, when he taps out of the game, and that's why I said at the time Steichen should be applauded, because that was a courageous decision that was going to get torn apart. Okay, Steichen's been in the league a long time, and I'm not saying he makes decisions for the media, but ultimately, having been around the league for a certain period of time, you'd assume that Steichen has some idea of how the media is going to react to something. You would imagine he anticipates it on some front. So when I said that was courageous at the time, I said because that was the definition of accountability. In a season where people are talking, and the buzzword right now and the buzz phrase is there is no accountability in the Colts franchise, that move was the definition of accountability. So number one, I liked seeing that in there, I guess to really validate my own opinion on that situation, because if you asked a lot of people, I was kind of crazy. There were some people that disagreed with me to the point of, whatever, right? But then the next piece that he says to me, what's going on here? Says they went back to AR, and at that point, it's like, okay, but what are we doing? That really affected the team? Let me ask you something. What in the hell, if you are, and again, I don't know who said this, if you are, hypothetically speaking, a linebacker, and I'm not implying anything, by the way, by saying linebacker, it's just the first position that came to mind. if you are the linebacker of this football team, respectfully, what the hell does the guy that is starting at quarterback that week have to do with you? Now, I understand throughout the course of the game, right? If the offense is anemic, that's going to affect you in the flow of a game as a defense, hypothetically, or an offense, no matter how you look at it, okay? But when it comes to your week of preparation, when it comes to your effort, when it comes to the energy that you bring to the table, why is that affecting you? That shouldn't have anything to do with it. That's just my personal opinion. And listen, I understand that these guys work hard. So as someone who sits here behind a microphone, doesn't play in the league, I do like to be careful when I say something like soft or weak or something that would imply something like that. But the idea that really affected the team, what does it matter? Okay, what are we doing? What are you doing? How about that? What are you doing? To you, it should not matter in the course of a season as a player what the organization is doing. You worry about that in the offseason, whether you're trying to request a trade or your contract is up or you're going to free agency, whatever the case may be. What is the organization doing is not a question for the season. As a player, you have to have your eye on the prize. So to say, okay, what are we doing? It's almost one of those situations where, yeah, he's saying that to put an indictment on the organization, but at the same time, thank goodness he was anonymous, because in my opinion, that's an indictment on whoever that guy was and potentially a lot of other guys on the team. What does it matter? Have I made that point clear? If you're a player, your job is to prepare for the week and show up no matter who the heck is on the field. If you're looking at the quarterback position and saying, going into this game, this affects something about the way I'm going to play, prepare, engage, whatever it is, even if on a subconscious level, that is a recipe to lose. That's a recipe to lose. And I thought that right there was the most telling part of this entire piece, quite frankly. And then just quickly to go back to that piece on the accountability, because it was a point I was meaning to make and forgot about it. When we talk about this idea right now of Shane Steichen holding people accountable, and him kind of not enforcing a culture in this locker room, I suppose my only question is this. Yes, his job, of course, is to enforce and implement a culture in this organization for these players, for this team, a standard, right, that they have to live up to, or else you're kind of out of here. I think there's been a few cases that we have seen outright, from Anthony Richardson's benching to Dallas Flowers. You look at the end of the season last year with Tony Brown, Isaiah McKenzie, Darrell Baker Jr., right? A Deion Jackson. Are we going to forget about that? I mean, he went from the guaranteed second back to cut over the course of like less than a month, okay? So I don't think there's no accountability here. The question, though, is, okay, this guy is responsible for setting and maintaining a culture. My question to you about Shane Steichen is this. Is it fair to expect him to come in and have fixed a culture without being brought in, or without new players being brought in? Like, is that something that is just maybe a little bit more, like you're asking the guy to bite off more than anyone would chew? I mean, even the Dan Campbell, who is the most obvious example of a guy turning a culture around, number one, that took time. That wasn't overnight. Like, Dan Campbell did not start good in Detroit. But number two, there was an influx of new players. Like, guys were shipped off from that team. Guys were brought into that team, okay? So it wasn't just the coach himself. Of course, he was the catalyst. But ultimately, you had an organization that was on board potentially with what that guy was doing, right? And saying, okay, these are the players that are part of the problem. These are the players that might be part of the solution. And these are some players that we can bring in that we also think could be part of the solution. All of that stuff matters. And all I'm saying is, again, because I want to just listen, I'm not going to sit here and, bang the table and scream if Shane Steichen is to get fired. All I want to do is make sure that we understand that there are two sides to the Shane Steichen discussion. And it's not just a matter of he's failing as a head coach right now. There's something greater that is going on here. And we're not sure exactly what it is, but I'm trying to drop the breadcrumbs and try to piece them together for you guys, okay? Now, speak of the idea of someone being part of the problem and someone being part of the solution. Pat McAfee, again, went in on Zaire Franklin and basically said, hey, I believe the exact words were, get this guy the fuck out of the city. Now, that, in my opinion, is a little bit extreme. And right now, Zaire Franklin's catching a lot of grief. He got a lot of grief from me. I mean, I just absolutely had choice words about Zaire Franklin the other day. But if I'm to present the other side of this thing, I will just, I don't know, pose a question. And I'm posing a question not so much, sometimes you'll ask a question, and by asking the question, you're really giving an opinion or giving your answer to the question. That's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm legitimately asking a question for exploration, for discussion. A guy like Zaire Franklin, I don't think any of us would disagree that he can play, okay? Now, we could talk about his leadership, and we could talk about, the podcast and all that stuff, but I don't think there's a question amongst anybody that Zaire Franklin can play football. I think a lot of our questions lie in where his heart is at. Does he care more about himself or more about the team? I think that is slightly unfair in the sense that, well, let's be fair. Most everyone is going to care more about themselves than the team on some level. I mean, you could sit there and say you care about the team over everything, but the reality is that most guys, including some of the great ones, likely have their self-interest at least at an equal level, right, as to what the team's success is, but that's neither here nor there. My question about Zaire Franklin is this. Sure, he may not be the guy fit to lead this defense into kind of a new era, a new identity, a new culture, if you will. That's the word being thrown around right now. I'll go along with it. But can he still be part of the solution if perhaps someone came in to lead him? Does that make sense? Like if, and this is a huge if, particularly if Chris Ballard were the GM of this team going into this offseason and next season, but it's a hypothetical. If somebody that we felt was fit to lead, whether it be a defensive coordinator who's kind of a more of a rah-rah players type of guy who's going to take that thing by the balls on the defensive side of the ball, or another player that perhaps has a bit more of a winning pedigree, let's say, and has been in locker rooms that have won things, if that guy is to come in and become a captain, can Zaire Franklin, given what we know he can do on the field, still be part of the solution? That's a question that I feel not many of us are talking about. If any of you guys saw his media availability, listen, I'm not going to sit here and defend the mistakes that he made and what he said. It is inexcusable to the point of complete clownery. I mean, what he said is, and he's regretful of it, right? And that's really the point I'm bringing up. I thought, listen, you can't change what you did, okay? And I'm not saying that I am completely like Zaire Franklin. I've completely forgotten about that. All is good here, okay? That's not what I'm trying to say. But you can't change what you did in the past, okay? But in his first media availability, since that moment, he got asked about that quite a bit. And if you have not watched it, okay, whether or not you're mad at him, if you're to sit there and be objective, he handled that like a man, okay? He wasn't childish about that. He took that on the chin. And what he said was, reasonable stuff. Now, whether or not you believe him, that's a different point. All I'm saying is that Zaire Franklin, say what you want about his ability to lead a defense to consistency and winning ways, if you will. I'm not exactly sure he could not be part of the solution here in Indianapolis. I just think that his role in the locker room potentially would have to be diminished. Now, I suppose the other question, if I'm to argue against myself, is, well, okay, it would have to be diminished, but given his rapport here and given kind of how entrenched he is into the locker room, into the organization, and into the inner workings of this whole thing, could you do that with the type of personality that he is? Another question. Again, that's what I'm telling you. I'm not giving you answers. I'm asking questions. I'm here to facilitate the discussion, okay? Another thing, final thing, and if I could share my screen real quickly, Anthony Richardson, I thought, said something that was encouraging. If we're going to try to find some good news here in the Colts media cycle right now, I thought he said something that was pretty encouraging in one sense in his most recent media availability. Let me see if I could share the tabs. Bear with me for those of you who are watching, for those of you who are listening on the audio version. We will get there shortly. Okay. So listen to this question right here.
Yeah, what do you think you need to, I guess, improve the most as a passer this year, knowing that you're last in the league in pitch?
Being smart with the ball, of course, making decisions, down the field, taking deep shots when I have the opportunity to do so, but just taking the easy things. I feel like That's one area in my game that I can grow a lot in. Just taking the easy completions, taking the takedowns when I can, and just moving the ball down the field so the offense can stay on the field and we can put up points. I feel like that's something I'm going to be looking forward to this offseason. I'm making sure I'm being accurate with every pass, especially the short and intermediate stuff.
Okay. Hopefully that was heard. I mean, I'm not generally, this is kind of live to recording. So I for all I know on the recorded version, that's not going to be heard. In case it's not, I'll just say what it is. And if you heard it, bear with me. Okay. I'm just for safety here. Essentially, the reporter said, as a passer, how do you think you could improve? I'm paraphrasing. And Anthony Richardson said, yada, yada, yada. But then he said, taking the easy things and making sure the offense sustains drives, essentially. At least that's what I got from that. Now, if you listen to that and say that's not at all what he said, all right, I'll fall back. But that's what I heard right there. And listen, on a positive note, that shows a level of self-awareness. The one thing, if we're to make an excuse for Anthony Richardson, okay, I'll show some grace here, despite the fact that I think as a fan base as a whole, a lot of us have let him off the hook for his shortcomings. I will say this. In the heat of an NFL season, when you talk about things like that, where, that's something that has to be repped out. It's not to say it couldn't be repped out throughout the week, but at the same time, throughout the week, you're going through there's only so many hours in a day. You have to watch the film, you have to install the offense, you have to go through the reps in practice, and then you have to show up on game day and execute that offense, okay? So if you're having a tough time with that type of thing, sure, playing in game can help, but if it's something that requires more repetitions, those are potentially repetitions. When you're talking about something that you have to drill over and over and over and over again, it is not the easiest thing to fit in during the speed of the season that is just kind of coming at you week after week after week after week. So I kind of appreciated that self-awareness, and it, at least on some level, gives me hope that going into this offseason, at minimum, he knows what he needs to do to get better. I mean, the first step is admitting it, right? The first step is having an understanding of what it is that the issue is at hand, and it seems like Anthony Richardson has it. The question is, now that we know that that is the case, is it a question? Whatever. Now that we know that that is the case and that he understands what it is, well, okay, bud, you have an entire offseason to work on that. Are you going to look any better early in next season? Because I was willing to be patient basically all the way up until late in this season. Essentially, the way I viewed it is I said I expected him to improve as the season went on. And sure, you had the two comebacks, but ultimately he was consistently inconsistent as a passer. He has his big plays, but the offense stalls far too often as a byproduct of the fact that he can't complete a football 50% of the time. And I know that's kind of like a jab that people don't like to hear. It's true. You could talk about drops all you want. He's the only quarterback I've ever seen that could go 15 or 35 and have people talk about 2 or 3 drops in the game. I mean, okay, let's say they caught him. All right. I mean, what are we talking about here, right? But that being said, now that we know that he knows, that means that next year, if it's not there early in the season, listen, it doesn't mean he didn't work hard, but perhaps he didn't do the right work. Whatever it is, okay, we should be able to expect that he shows improvement on that front. Not that he shows that he's a finished product, but we should be able to look at the early parts of next season and say, is this guy better than what we saw at the end of last season? Because what we saw throughout this season was a guy who really did not get significantly better whatsoever. Had a couple moments that were kind of able to, add a little bit of positivity to what was overall a pretty abysmal season for Anthony Richardson, if we're to be 100% honest here. If we're to be 100% honest, that's what it was. And as I keep saying, the Colts, with all the stuff going on with Anthony Richardson, with the inconsistencies passing, with the injuries, obviously we have the back deal right now. Whatever. Obviously, that's alarming for anyone that's involved, right? There's not anything insightful I could say about the back injury other than the fact that I don't see how, if you have a bad back, how that is something that is going to get better the longer you play in the league. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But also, I don't want to make, right now, everything that's going on is exaggerated and blown up. So who knows how big of a problem that actually is. That's kind of a time will tell type of situation. But you have that. You have the inconsistencies as a passer. And yeah, I guess I have some sort of questions now about, right, his preparation on a week-to-week basis. We have questions about that. Those are 3 things right there. Those are questions. 3 questions is too many. And at the quarterback position, you're going to have some sort of pivot or fallback plan. Not one that is like to the tune of drafting a first-round quarterback, particularly in a year where quarterback is not considered to be the premium position in the draft, but there has to be something that you do, whether it's drafting someone in the third round, bringing in another quarterback in free agency that wants it, perhaps trading for someone else's backup that has shown some level of promise. Boy, do I have a great idea about that. I am sharing it soon, and you'll be able to actually take a look at it on Sunday. Not my opinion. I'll make sure to give it to you guys before then, but you'll be able to maybe watch the guy on Sunday. Hint, hint. So, if any of you guys are trying to decode what it is that I'm teasing here, go ahead. But with that said, that's the episode that I have. And until next time, my name is Justin. This right here was the Ride the Bench Colts podcast. And as always, go Colts.